He was the embodiment of Aryanism and held a high position as adjutant to the head of the Black Order. He managed to become the youngest commander of an elite SS tank regiment, but his name went down in history forever as that of a bloody war criminal. Why did the notorious SS Standardführer Joachim Paper, with such a dark baggage, dare to settle in France? And how was he finally held accountable for his actions after many years? Sadly, even today, SS Standardführer Joachim Paper is, in a way, more alive than ever. In the United States of America, for example, he has a whole army of fanatical admirers, and among their ranks are both representatives of the fair sex, captivated by his appearance, and professional soldiers who consider Paper the epitome of white military aristocracy. The amount of media materials devoted to the life of this Alain Delon in SS uniform is simply indecently large. Moreover, the unhealthy worship of Paper is spreading even to Russia. In popular Russian social networks, you can find entire fan groups dedicated to this war criminal, and the enthusiastic comments of women under his photos, in the style of, "Oh, what an irresistible handsome man," number in the hundreds. It creates the depressing impression that modern admirers of this SS handsome man have completely forgotten about the deep, bloody trail he left across Europe. Therefore, in order to understand the situation, it is necessary to study his biography more carefully. Joachim Paper was born on January 30th, 1915, becoming the third son in the family of a career officer of the German Imperial Army, a veteran of the First World War. As a child, this gifted boy showed a genuine interest in French culture and mastered the language of the neighboring country perfectly. He was predicted a career as a cultural scientist or art historian. But in his youth, Joachim fell under the strong influence of his father and middle brother Horst, Paper's father, who himself had taken part in the military campaign in Africa, was not only a professional soldier, but also a former Free Corps fighter, a convinced nationalist and an ardent imperialist. He brought up his sons in the spirit of rabid national militarism, instilling in them a sense of endless resentment against the whole world, which, in his opinion, had allegedly treated poor Germany unfairly. Paper Sr. deliberately filled his sons' heads with outright nonsense, like the infamous protocols of the elders of Zion. It is no wonder that already as a teenager, Joachim, striving to emulate his brother, found himself in youth nationalist circles. From this fateful moment on, all the young man's dreams were exclusively connected with a military career. In the early 1930s, the Paper brothers joined the ranks of the Hitler Youth, and soon after that, the infamous Schutzstaffel SS. In the ranks of the SS, the paths of the brothers quickly and irrevocably diverged. Horst Paper ended up in the Death's Head concentration camp units and took the position of a guard in one of the numerous concentration camps. In 1940, as part of the 3rd Death's Head Tank Division, he took direct part in the French campaign, and in 1941, he tragically died as a result of a senseless accident. Joachim was much luckier. For the first time in his life, his attractive Aryan appearance played into his hands, and at the Nazi Party Congress in distant 1934, he was noticed by the Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler himself. Thanks to the patronage of the head of the Black Order, the young SS man, Paper graduated with honors from the Junker School, basically SS officer courses, in 1938, and just 2 months after graduation became one of the personal adjutants of the Reichsfuhrer SS himself. This fateful event finally determined the further military career of Joachim Paper in the Second World War. All SS men, for whom Himmler had certain far-reaching plans, were immediately transferred to his personal staff in Berlin. Paper was no exception. Moreover, between them, to the undisguised envy of other associates of the Reichsfuhrer SS, a certain special connection developed rapidly, bordering on something greater. Himmler began to actively promote the young SS officer up the career ladder. Regardless of the others, starting in 1939, Paper was already accompanying the Reichsfuhrer SS at all official events, including meetings with Adolf Hitler himself. It is interesting that Himmler knew very well about the very complicated and peculiar nature of his protege. In the personal safe of the Reichsfuhrer SS was a service characteristic of paper. Issued at his graduation from the SS Junker School, it was noted there, among other things, that paper had a clearly expressed tendency to blackmail his teachers and brag about his special connections with the Reichsfuhrer. The SS psychologist, in turn, noted his extreme egocentricity and made the disappointing conclusion that he was highly likely to be either a difficult subordinate or an arrogant commander. As they say, they had a premonition. And then, like a bolt from the blue, the Second World War began. During the Polish campaign, Himmler's young adjutant was constantly by his chief's side, spending weeks in his personal comfortable train. Already in this early period, he became a direct witness to numerous SS atrocities, which we will discuss a little later. And during the French campaign, Himmler decided to personally involve his favorite in military operations. In May 1940, Paper took command of a detachment of the 11th Company of the elite motorized regiment Leibstandard Adolf Hitler, and distinguished himself by a daring rout of a British artillery battery in the Dunkirk area. For his personal courage and bravery, he was awarded the Iron Cross, and Himmler personally awarded him the rank of SS Hauptsturmführer. Goebbels' propaganda instantly elevated the photogenic SS man to the heavens. In the summer of 1940, Paper's handsome face was literally plastered on the front pages of newspapers and magazines. In a relatively short time, he became a real celebrity throughout Germany. In fact, this is where the myth of paper originates. After the crushing defeat of France, Himmler, with a jealous heart, returned the newly minted hero to his staff. But with a significant promotion, Paper officially took the position of first adjutant of the Reichsfuhrer SS. He remained in this very high position until the end of the summer of 1941, after which he again went to the Eastern Front, this time as commander of the 11th Company of the Leibstandard, with his company, Paper took a direct part in the fierce battles in the south of the Soviet Union, including from Mariupol, Taganrog, and Rostov. After the November counteroffensive of the Red Army, Paper and his company desperately held back the Soviet onslaught on the Meuse River. In 1942, the heavily battered Leibstandard was hastily sent to France for reorganization, after which it returned to the Eastern Front in the winter of 1943. Paper's star, who by that time commanded one of the tank battalions, truly shone during the bloody Third Battle for Kharkov. It was his reinforced battalion, the so-called Paper Battle Group, that fought its way to the surrounded units of the 320th Wehrmacht Division and helped to bring many wounded German soldiers out of the cauldron. For this daring and risky breakthrough, Himmler's favorite received the prestigious Knight's Cross, and again, his face appeared for a long time on the front pages of numerous magazines. Himmler, in complete delight, wrote to Paper in a personal congratulatory letter. "I heartily congratulate you on the well-deserved Knight's Cross, my dear Johann. I am truly proud of you. Please subscribe to our channel and leave a like so that you are always aware of the most interesting historical events and can hear many more exciting stories about the Second World War and the opinions of all sides of the participants about various events." Then there was the inglorious participation in the bloody Battle of Kursk and the emergency transfer to Italy, the so-called Operation Axis, and of course the next return to Ukraine. It is noteworthy that, despite the massive propaganda hype surrounding his so-called exploits, Paper's real reputation as a commander was, frankly, quite disparaging. He was known as a classic meat grinder commander of the Waffen-SS, absolutely indifferent to the losses of others, and above all to the losses of his own unit. German historian Jens Westemeyer, who wrote a detailed biography of Paper, argues that he was characterized by excessive arrogance instead of an adequate sense of reality, and that all of Himmler's favorites' few successes were paid for with the huge blood of his own subordinates. For example, when in November 1943, 28-year-old Paper was forced to replace the tragically killed commander of the 1st Tank Regiment of the Leibstandard. He barely managed, with reckless frontal attacks, to stop the Red Army's offensive in the direction of Zhytomyr. But this extremely dubious victory became, in essence, a real Pyrrhic victory in the short couple of weeks of fighting. Paper's regiment lost 2/3 of its personnel killed and wounded, and only 12 tanks were still operational. After this extremely dubious victory, Paper was even transferred to staff work, but Adolf Hitler, against common sense, awarded him the Oak Leaves in January 1944. By that time, Paper's propaganda significance already far outweighed his very dubious practical abilities. And honestly, Hitler had a clear fondness for just such fanatically bloody meat grinder commanders of the Waffen-SS. Paper's star rose for the last time during the infamous Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. By that time, the 29-year-old SS Obersturmbannführer was the youngest commander of an elite tank regiment in the entire German army. His battle group, reinforced with the newest Super Heavy King Tigers, after the start of the offensive in the Ardennes, quickly broke through into the deep American rear, but due to serious fuel and logistical problems, got bogged down in the marshy area, was blocked by the recovered superior American forces, and then defeated completely. In this senseless adventure, Paper almost irretrievably lost all his tanks. But despite the crushing defeat, Goebbels' propaganda with new force extolled his breakthrough. In January 1945, he was even awarded the swords to the Knight's Cross, which, however, meant very little by then. The last surge of Paper as a military commander was observed during the heavy fighting with the advancing Red Army in Hungary. In the bloody battle at Lake Balaton, Paper's regiment again rushed into another reckless attack, suffered enormous losses as usual, and hastily retreated to the territory of Austria. And again, despite all the numerous failures and miscalculations, Paper was promoted to SS Standartenführer, and as a sign of special recognition for his merits directly on Adolf Hitler's birthday. After the complete surrender of Nazi Germany on May 9, 1945, the remnants of the Leibstander received an order from OKW for unconditional surrender to American troops, but Paper, as if nothing had happened, abandoned his long-suffering unit and calmly went home. There his wife, who also worked on the staff of Himmler himself. They married with his personal blessing back in 1939, and 3 small children were waiting for him. However, the Americans, outraged by the inhuman atrocities of his unit against American prisoners in the Ardennes, had the corresponding orientations on Paper, and he was put on the wanted list. At the end of May 1945, the German Alain Delon, in SS uniform, was finally arrested. Even after prison, where Paper would spend a long and painful 12 years, he would vehemently deny his participation in any war crimes. "I was just a soldier and a convinced anti-Bolshevik," he would stubbornly repeat at every corner until his death. Paper even denied those obvious crimes that the Germans on the Eastern Front did not even think of hiding. His modern admirers continued to vehemently and unscrupulously whitewash the activities of this SS criminal, telling tall tales and fairy tales about the so-called Green SS, who, unlike the black ones, were supposedly just ordinary soldiers. But what is the truth? What is the real situation? Everything is ridiculously simple and clear. Only a very unintelligent and naive person can sincerely believe this nonsense and blatant lie. Let's start with the fact that already during the Polish campaign of 1939, Paper saw and knew everything perfectly well. As Himmler's personal adjutant, he traveled with him through occupied Poland and observed with his own eyes the inhuman work of the SD Einsatzgruppen. In 1940, Himmler, in the company of his favorite adjutant, made a long trip to numerous concentration camps. Together with Paper, they personally visited Buchenwald, Dachau, Neuengamme, Flossenburg, and the terrible Sachsenhausen. Paper learned especially much bitter truth about his criminal state after the treacherous attack on the Soviet Union. The fact is that it was he, together with the second adjutant, who processed all the reports of the SD Einsatzgruppen in the USSR that were sent to Himmler. If you have ever read even one of the hundreds of surviving reports, You know very well what they were about. In July 1941, Himmler, together with Paper, personally inspected the Tilsit-Einsatzkommando. By the way, a week before the start of the attack on the USSR, Paper was also a direct participant in the famous meeting held by his chief Himmler at a secret gathering of high-ranking SS men in the ancient Wilsberg Castle. And now the tricky question. Could Paper, armed with such terrible knowledge, go to the Eastern Front and not commit a single war crime? Of course, this is simply ridiculous and absurd. In fact, his direct involvement in the mass extermination of civilians became reliably known from the interrogations of captured German soldiers, who were captured by the Americans in the Falaise Pocket. They gave their notorious boss up completely. For example, it turned out that after the capture of Taganrog, the commander of the SS Leibstandard Division, Sepp Dietrich, sent an entire platoon of Paper's soldiers to reinforce the Einsatzgruppe. At that time, thousands of innocent people were brutally exterminated in the Petroshina ravine of the city. Also, in the autumn of 1941, the same Leibstandard, on Dietrich's direct order, destroyed more than 5,000 Soviet prisoners of war who had been captured earlier. Paper could not physically have been uninvolved in all of this. In 1943, in the Kharkov region, on Paper's direct order, the villages of Yefremovka, Semyonovka, and Krasnaya Polyana were completely destroyed to the ground. Since then, in his unit, Paper was called nothing more than the Blowtorch Battalion for his maniacal passion for fire. In a letter to a close friend, Paper boasted that our terrible reputation runs ahead of us, and that even old and cruel Genghis Khan would gladly take us as faithful assistants. In the same 1943, during the infamous Operation Axis, Paper's battalion completely destroyed the Italian village of Boves. The reason was an attack by Italian partisans on German occupiers. In 1944, during the Ardennes operation, Paper's battle group was noted for the mass destruction of unarmed American soldiers and peaceful Belgian civilians. And this is only what is known for certain. No one will ever know how many terrible and inhuman crimes Paper actually committed. After the end of the war, for the bloody Malmedy massacre, where about 100 captured American soldiers were brutally killed, the Americans sentenced Paper to the highest punishment, death penalty. But in accordance with the then practice, the sentence was reviewed several times. First, the death penalty was commuted to life imprisonment, then to 35 years in prison, and in 1956, Paper was surprisingly released altogether. After his unexpected release, Paper did not repent in any way and did not admit his guilt. Secretly, he was a member of various illegal SS veteran organizations and maintained close contact with other odious and bloodthirsty war criminals. He got a job at the well-known car company Porsche, but was shamefully fired after Italian trade unions went on strike, categorically refusing to work with a man who was involved in the complete destruction of one of the Italian villages. Paper tried to challenge his unlawful dismissal through the court, claiming that all crimes were allegedly invented by the victors for the deliberate denigration of the German people. This, of course, did not help, although the company did pay him the costs due under the law. In the 1960s, a very serious rethinking of all the terrible crimes of the Third Reich began in Germany. Great attention began to be paid to the Holocaust and other, no less inhuman crimes against the peaceful civilian population. And after the well-known trial of Adolf Eichmann in Israel, a whole series of high-profile trials of local executioners took place in Germany itself. Gradually, Paper's forgotten name also began to be heard again. The former adjutant of Himmler, Karl Wolff, and the executioner of Belarus, Boksiluski, who was serving a life sentence, spoke about his very difficult role in Himmler's empire. Based on the newly discovered circumstances, the prosecutor's office of the Federal Republic of Germany began another investigation against Paper regarding the mass massacre in the Italian village of Boves. It was not possible to prove that he personally gave the order for its complete destruction, but the nerves of the former SS icon were thoroughly frayed. In the early 1970s, Paper, under a false name, purchased a plot of land in France. where he secretly moved with his family. But in a local grocery store, he was accidentally recognized by one of the former fighters of the French Resistance. Soon, leaflets were posted all over the village with a warning: "Beware! Your neighbor is a dangerous and bloodthirsty SS criminal." A strong and protracted outcry arose in the press, and journalists began to persistently besiege the elderly SS man. Surprisingly, he not only did not refuse numerous interviews, but also made very disparaging and offensive anti-French statements. Thus, to a direct question from a journalist about why he nevertheless decided to settle in France, Paper replied without hesitation that he had always loved France. Although he would prefer that there were no French people in it, on another occasion, he defiantly stated that he lived here only because the French had not shown due courage in 1940, and again, he spoke for a long time and stubbornly about the fact that he was just a soldier, and that all claims about his numerous crimes were nothing more than Bolshevik propaganda. He complained that the leftists were very strong in France, and that he constantly received unambiguous threats from local communists. At the same time, Paper openly threatened through the press to severely punish anyone who only tried to attack him. As it turned out a little later, he kept a rifle and a revolver at home. Paper's life ended unexpectedly and tragically on the night of July 14th, 1976. The date itself, Bastille Day, was very, very symbolic, given that the arriving firefighters discovered Paper's charred body right on the ashes of his burning house. It became absolutely obvious that someone's long arms were still able to reach him. Later, a thorough investigation established that the intruders had entered his yard at night, killed the guard dogs, and pelted the SS man's house with Molotov cocktails. Paper's badly burned body was found in one of the rooms with a rifle clutched in his hands. This allowed for a perfectly logical conclusion that he had fiercely fought back until the end, and then simply inhaled the corrosive fumes and lost consciousness. The fire that spread throughout the house only completed the bloody bait. Paper's murderers were never found, despite all the efforts of the investigating authorities. Later, one of the local underground communist cells claimed responsibility for the daring attack on his house. Thus, quite symbolically and in accordance with his deeds, ended the life of Paper, nicknamed Blowtorch. Goodbye. We were sincerely glad to see you on our channel. Do not forget to write comments, leave likes, and subscribe to our constantly developing channel.